because
Hi, guys. Welcome to Real Food Recovery. We are really excited because we have a special guest today, and I'm not going to belabor it any further. I'm just going to turn it over to Jamie to introduce her and ask and share her bio, and we'll go from there.
Yeah,
Hi, Jamie.
thanks. Thanks, Paige. We have Clarissa Kennedy here. This is a wonderful opportunity. We are very, very grateful to be on talking today with Clarissa. Clarissa Kennedy is a distinguished clinical social worker and founder of Reinvent Your Bliss Point, co-founder of Sweet Sobriety, and co-host of the Food Junkies Podcast. With over 15 years of experience across residential treatment, outpatient services, and private practice, Clarissa is a leader in the field of food addiction and eating disorders. She holds a specialized diploma in the professional addiction studies and is currently part of the team advocating for ultra-processed food addiction to be recognized in the International Classification of Disease with the World Health Organization. So it's a very important mission. Clarissa's personal journey through food addiction and eating disorders really fuels her empathetic and client-centered approach. And that's what we're going to dig into today. She has not only personal experience, but a lot of professional experience that she applies here. Clarissa is also a somatically informed self-compassion therapist who incorporates a blend of cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and mindfulness-based interventions into the work that she does. Her commitment to her clients' healing really makes her not just a therapist, but a true partner on that journey to recovery. So, Clarissa, thank you for joining us today. Is there anything that you want to add to, your background or experience?
no, I think you covered it all, and I'm just so grateful to be here today with both of you.
Us too. Thank you. Paige, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, do you want to start out by sharing your story with us? And I'm sure you have a story to tell, so that might be a good place to start with your history.
Yeah, well, I know we only have 45 minutes, and my story could probably take all of them. As it was there was a lot of highs and lows and a lot of learning and growth. And my story might actually be a bit different than perhaps some of your other guests, but I hope it will resonate with some of your listeners. So, my story is really a history of eating disorder and alcohol use disorder and substance use disorder. So at 19, I was diagnosed with anorexia and left my first year of university at 80 pounds. So, following that, I really struggled with bulimia, overexercise, laxative use, all the while going to multiple schools and getting diplomas and now, working in the restaurant industry, which at the time I thought was because of my, leaning towards the party scene with alcohol, but perhaps there might have been some food use
Okay.
disorder stuff already going
Sure.
on. And so while, and eventually I got to a point where I became an owner operator of a Boston pizza franchise, which here in Canada is fairly popular. And so, I'm 25. I'm now owner operator, general manager of a restaurant, and I was in a major car accident. And now that car accident had a lot to do with the restriction, the laxative use, plus there was some alcohol use going on at the time. And so recovery from that required pain medication as I had broken my arm in 10 places.
Wow.
The physiotherapy was really like they had to reteach me how to use my arm. And so it healed kind of, I don't know if your listeners will be able to see, but essentially I had to heal next to my body. And then they would put it in this thing that kind of like created external rotation. My physiotherapist would like lie on top of me and try and like stretch my arm out. So, it required, the physio plus the pain medication to manage it. And they ended up leaving dirt in the wound. So they had to go back in, reoperate, take the metal plate out, and it had to heal all over again. So I was on pain medication for 2 years. And this is pre opiate, like
Right.
Oxycontin
Before they,
crisis. So
yeah.
my dad's a doctor, my mom's a nurse, my sister's a nurse. Nobody is saying, like, oh, we really need to be concerned about this. I was on Percocet at the time and let me tell you this, as somebody who struggled with eating disorders, Percocet and pain medication, made me feel happy and it took away hunger. So there was these added benefits that I was getting from this medication. And I went back to work 6 months after the accident. And so I'm not really even understanding that there's anything wrong until I start to need to wean myself off them. And now I'm realizing that I'm dependent on them. And owning a bar, it seemed quite natural that I would just start to, maybe, be my own, you know, prescription person and figure it out and say, I'll reduce my pain pill use and I'll start using some alcohol.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was I became dependent on both. And then we had a conference in California that I was supposed to attend. And I realized I wouldn't be able to use both when I was there. So I just went cold turkey and I ended up with like days of hallucinations. I ended up in the psych ward of my dad's hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And, fortunately, that was enough for me to never have to struggle with, these pain medications again. However, I still, hadn't resolved my food issues. So I was still restricting all the time. And I would find like every 8 months, I would have a return to use with alcohol. So I continued my recovery journey, lots of therapy, and then 3 treatment centers for alcohol, always going in sober, always with the best hopes, right? For what are they going to teach me? What am I doing wrong? Never once was food talked about and what you're eating, or was anyone asking me about that? Until my 3rd treatment center was Renaissance in Toronto. And the medical director there was Dr. Vera Tarman.
Yeah.
And so on my intake, I gave her my history and she's typing in. And then all of a sudden she like turns and she's like, have you ever heard of food addiction? And she's like, I think this might be your thing. And so she gave me her book. She told me about this InFact program in Iceland. And I immediately signed up, trained, and went there and got certified, and it wasn't easy. I'll say that. Like, it for me, it wasn't hard to give up the ultra processed foods because I had been struggling since 18 and now I'm 36, right? So if this is going to heal my, alcohol use disorder, if this is going to heal my bulimia, which is still showing up, I'm willing to do anything at this point.
So were you a patient with her and then also being certified?
So I was a patient in Vera's Renaissance program.
Right.
And then I went and I took the addictions course through the international training. And at this point, I've already been working in the field of mental health and addictions for like 10 or 12 years.
Yeah.
And never once had anyone talked about food addiction. But anecdotally, I'd seen all clients go off like cocaine or like opiates, go to sugar, alcohol, go to sugar, but nobody in the field is talking about this. And I've taken professional courses on it. So I was really curious about this, as obviously I'd witnessed it. And so there in the InFact program, there's a residential aspect. So you go to Iceland, and I think there was about 8 to 10 clients, but all the treatment providers or students also had to follow the same program that the clients were doing. And so just to give you an idea, I think it was like 4 ounces of protein, 20 ounces of vegetables, and like 2 tablespoons of fat at each meal, which was 1,000 times more food. And then I'd been eating, like I ate that much in maybe one day, maybe even not. So that was what I found to be the most challenging, was the quantity of food I needed to eat. But I had told myself at this point, I'm willing to try anything. I still like exercised in the morning, and I still, struggled at night with the urge to purge. However, I was like, you're only here for, 5 days. You can do anything. And by day 3, I really felt like the lights came on. I started to be sleeping better. I started to be thinking clearer. I just felt calmer. I felt happier. And, I really felt like oh, this is how people do life.
Yes.
I've been wondering for so long. And from there, obviously now I've somewhat modified like my food plan, but it was a really helpful place to start. And I'm not 100% sure I could have done it on my own. So, yeah, that was kind of the beginning of my story. And, from that, I came back, I practiced my recovery for a while. And then, I decided to do this professionally and opened my own private practice, and then eventually reached out to Vera and said, do you want to do a podcast? And, met Molly at another intensive training. And now we have Sweet Sobriety. And we, just through meeting lots of people on the podcast and doing a bunch of research in the field, we also did a treatment study, which was 12 modules. And we did about 150 clients, and we took them through our program. And the results were amazing. We don't really care about body mass index, but the world does. So, predominantly people's BMI went down, their well-being went up, and their food addiction symptoms went down after 10 weeks. And, you don't see those kind of results in the eating disorder treatment field.
No, no. Very true. Very true. One of the things that I see, and I'm active not only in real food recovery, but I have a long recovery background myself, in the 12-step world before I founded RFR. And I'm thinking about, all of the folks that I know in the 12-step world. I know, my background was not in alcoholism, but I have many, many friends who have that background. And they have, really beautiful, beautiful recoveries, right? In the 12-step recovery world, beautiful, vibrant recoveries. And they work a program that people are inspired by. And I see them, many of them are struggling, deeply struggling with food.
Yeah.
And they can, there's iconic 12-step recovery tapes, right? Of folks talking about their recovery stories, right? Their what do they call them? Their drunkalogs, right?
Yeah.
Well, they'll talk about their, these just glorious recovery journeys from alcohol or drugs. And then of course, these are all anonymous, right? But you happen to see a picture or meet them in person, and it's clear they're struggling with food, right? For many of their outside, right? So they're sort of wearing their struggle with food. What has been your experience there, in your inpatient, outpatient work?
Oh, definitely. Like I worked in assertive community treatment teams, and there you're dealing with addiction and or substance use disorders and mental health. And it's pretty much almost the regular, the norm that people are struggling with food. And but they blame it on the medications, they blame it on other things, and they're told like this is not, oh, eat sugar, you can have the donut rather than the drink, but it's contributing to depression, anxiety, all like just amplifying all of their problems. And you know what, I might be sober from alcohol, but if I'm living in a body that doesn't feel like home and I'm still stuck in addiction, I am not feeling like I'm in recovery. I'm still feeling, kind of unsettled and maybe, in air quotes, crazy. And I'm like, if this is what sobriety is, I'm not sure if that I want this. And so I certainly see people struggling. And part of the reason why I'm so passionate about having this recognized is that treatment centers will start to also take it seriously and be providing people nutritious meals that will help enhance their recovery, that this will be part of recovery, because we know it works and we know how beneficial it can be. And very often in treatment programs, I would see there's still candy and stuff everywhere.
Right.
Oh, if you're struggling in the middle of the night, come down and have whatever you want. And some of the quality of foods, that are being offered, you just know it's like they're not putting any of their money towards their nutrition program. And that's what needs to change.
I agree. Do you think, and my follow-up question before turn it over to Paige again, is just, do you think that there's sort of a spectrum, right? And maybe if they're on one side of the spectrum with addiction to substance or alcohol, that they sort of slide back, right? As they slide away from that side of the spectrum, the extreme side, and they're sliding back towards not even just sobriety, right? But true recovery. Is the slide, does it take them through food?
Well, I think it could be seen as cross addiction, right?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Is really what I would say is more how I see it. I think, when we are severe with alcohol use disorder or opiate use disorder or whatever, we are 80% more likely to go into screens, gambling, pornography, and food is, we are biologically hardwired for food. So, and also, like, nobody sees ultra processed foods for the problem that they really are unless you've struggled with it. And if nobody's educating you about it, then you're just doing, like, all we want to do is, the reason we use drugs is to feel better, right? And ultra processed foods makes us feel better. When I am feeling low, it's going to make me feel better. And it works until it doesn't work anymore. And then we have to start to, with any substance, right? We all use for a reason. And that's because it often works until, it becomes the symptoms, or like the chronic cycle becomes unmanageable and it's not working. And it's all the negative consequences are outweighing the positive ones that started in the beginning.
I love what you said about, we're using this in place of drugs or whatever just to feel better. But it numbs and excites at the same time, right? It numbs feelings.
Oh, yeah.
So
well,
it's an interesting phenomenon how it does both activities all at the same time.
Right. Well, I will say this because people will often say, oh, it's the reward pathway. Dopamine is all about reward. And like the people that I work with, it's not about reward, it's about relief. They're
Right.
like, it's really about, like, I just want to stop obsessing. I just need some kind of relief. Like, it may be about reward in the beginning, but anyone who's on the severe end of the spectrum, it's all about relief.
I know, because so many people think, oh, they're drug addicts. They're just wanting to get high. They don't want to get high. They want to get out of pain.
Right.
They do
And
many.
they may be using just to feel normal.
That's
Right.
exactly what I was going to say. You're just
Yeah.
below baseline. You're just trying to get back up to baseline. You aren't even trying to get high. You're just trying to get out of pain, which made me think about, when I would be in my sugar binges, sugar was my drug of choice. When during those binges, I would be terrified because I didn't know when it would stop.
Mhm.
And I would also be terrified that it would end all at the same time, because that meant I had to stop eating my drugs.
Yeah.
So it's terror and it's trauma on top of trauma. Every time it happens, it's trauma all over again. Terrified when it will stop, terrified that it will stop. So you said something earlier about the goal of recovery. For me, it was to get off that binging cycle and get to a place of peace and calm where everything's quiet upstairs. And
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering if you had what was your goal of recovery? Do you want to describe what the ultimate gift of recovery is to you?
Yeah, I would say it is the relief that I experience of not obsessing about food
Yeah,
anymore. How much can I eat?
meaningful.
I imagine just sitting. I remember sitting at a table, people sitting there with me, and I'm talking, but I'm in my head. I'm going to eat this. I'm not going to eat that. I'm going to eat this, or maybe I'll eat the whole plate. And then okay, now I'm going to go throw up. Do I have to run the water? Like
Oh yeah.
it's exhausting, the
Plotting and scheming.
games, the noise, the lying, hiding, sneaking, everyone thought I ate so healthy because I ate so healthy in front of them. But then the things that I did to myself was like, it was body violence, right? And so destructive. And so I felt so much shame around those behaviors. And so to not have to worry about that. And, through my car accident, I suffered a major traumatic brain injury. And so I really struggled with, retaining information, processing, cognitive function. And so when I started to eat, I mean, I didn't eat any fat from the age of 18 to 36. My only condiment was mustard, or light Italian dressing, which, was no fat, but lots of sugar. And so having the ability to think again and was just is like been the best gift
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, it's like the curtains in the living room draw back. Light comes
Yeah.
in. And,
Yeah.
my follow-up question to you is you talked about things about how much time is exhausted with negotiating this, I'm going to call it a disease. And don't you find that when you became clean, that you had more time in your day to do other things?
Yeah.
I know,
Self-care.
yeah, I started reading big girl books is my joke, and I never would have had the time or mental bandwidth to do that before. How could I? I was mentally exhausted from all the
Yeah.
gymnastics
Right.
of trying to put all the puzzle pieces together and keep all the balls in the air, and it literally is just an exhausting negotiation all day long because your addiction is always working the room.
Yeah. We're in a
It's always
state of
standing.
survival rather than being
Yes.
in a place where we can thrive.
Yes,
Right.
and looking for that third door. I'm always looking
Yeah.
for that third door. Is how can what's my other option besides, because I still would like to keep the sugar, but I want to keep my weight and I don't want to suffer. But so where's my third door? So yeah, a lot of time trying to figure
Yeah,
out.
that's
And
called cognitive dissonance, and it's a huge barrier
yeah,
in recovery. And it's the games that we play. I often find my clients that are the most intelligent have the hardest times recovering. So that's why I love the keep it simple, right?
yeah.
Because we can outthink our own addiction, and I think that's a huge challenge.
I never thought about that, but smart people are always trying to figure out a new way that hasn't been thought of, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a new thought I hadn't discovered before. Good
Talk
one.
to us a little bit more about, you mentioned about fat, and that's that you had eaten very little to no, or next to no fat for, it was what, 18 years or
Yeah,
15 plus.
approximately. Yeah.
So I've had my own journey where I severely limited fat for a part of probably about 4.5 years. And I saw a lot of, and it was very insidious. And I don't think I was aware of the extent of the damage, but I saw a lot of damage, downstream effects from severely limiting the fat in my
Mm-hmm.
diet. Tell, can you share a little bit more about when you mentioned that you had this sort of no fat dogma,
Yeah. Well,
low fat dogma? What were the downstream effects for you?
yeah, I think it was just that I would, really, I struggled with like focus and attention,
Mhm.
and it was all mostly cognitive, but I also didn't know any other way of living, if that makes sense. I grew up in the era of, fat makes you fat. And so the less fat you eat is better. And so I was like, then the best would be no fat at all. But we know the brain is 60% fat. And so we need fat for it to work properly. We also know fat is very satiating and can really help with that hunger and fullness signals. And so, by reintroducing it, that was probably the only way I would have reintroduced it was like being somewhat forced to.
Yep.
But like how it cognitively affected me was just such a game changer. And now I put like I do a coffee and I'll put MCT oil in it, which is a medium chain triglyceride. Like I put fat in my coffee, which I never thought I would do, but it makes me sharper. It allows more focus, and I just don't feel so like agitated throughout my day. So I really have noticed like I almost feel in some ways it's nervous system regulating.
Yeah.
Oh,
I yeah. For me, once I've heard about the importance of fat, dietary fat. And I knew that, and I too, I think we're probably around the same age. I too grew up in the no fat, low fat, fat is is the bad guy era. And I looked at when I sort of stopped and reflected on where our worlds, or at least North America, where our health has gone in those 40 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
Not we're in a much, much worse off place than we were 40 years ago. So I'm that's when I started to wake up to, okay, obviously this low fat dogma is wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and it's harming us. And then I noticed, for me, it was downstream effects of, you know, gut dysfunction and brain dysfunction and immune system dysregulation. I mean, all kinds of things, not to mention bone density decrease, and a lot of other, loss of lean mass, just lots of things that, because my body cells couldn't make the energy they needed to make because they weren't getting the
Right.
energy they needed to make, the all of the raw materials. They weren't getting any of the raw materials to actually make energy for me. Um,
Yeah.
and the energy that I was giving my body, right, through nutrition dogma that I thought was appropriate, really was not appropriate for my body. So I like to dive into that, and also just to look at, you know, you mentioned something earlier about you were in this program, right, the certification program that had you sort of eating, even before that in your recovery, had you eating a certain way with a measured amount of food every day. And you mentioned that, hey, this is like way more on some days than I was eating. How did you begin to learn how to trust yourself?
Yeah, it's something that is so challenging. And I think challenging for a lot of the clients I work with too. So I think it was really important for me to be on that program for 6 months where I started to get some stability. At that point, I was able to tune in to my hunger and fullness signals again. I noticed, like, at first, what we've noticed is that, we think that part of a post-acute withdrawal symptom might be that we're so nutritionally deficient that people start to develop volume addiction, and of whole foods. And so their body is just craving these nutrients that they haven't had in so long. And so eating this amount of food felt like I get to eat all of this. Like, if I was excited about all of it.
Mm.
But by month 6, it was like, I just can't. Like, it was just too much. And so I was like, I still knew I needed some loving limits around what I was eating, and the structure was really working for me. And so I just started to eat less than what was on my plate, but also knowing that I could put it in the fridge. And if I wanted
Have
it
it later.
later, I
Yeah.
could have it. And so
Mm.
I really think, obviously I have my own therapist. I think every therapist should have a therapist, which helped empower me. And, the recovery style meetings that I was leading and joining were really about empowerment. And rather than, I have my own personal experience with the 12 steps. And some of the things I don't like about it is that it's like, your best thinking got you here. Some of
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
statements, which are
Yeah.
really, shaming and don't take in the whole picture of
100%.
substance use disorder. And,
Take
the
what you
12
like
step.
and leave the rest is my favorite.
Yeah,
My
the 12
favorite.
step food program specifically about, like, if you don't eat what you're supposed to eat, like, you have to start back at day one.
Yeah.
And
Oh, wow.
so that can be really destructive to people. And I
You're right.
think instead of breaking people down, we need to lift people up and
And
let them
empower
know,
them.
yeah,
Empower them
they
to.
have their answers, their solutions. We just have to help them find them. And, that diet drama and trauma we've had our whole life has been telling us our whole life not to trust ourselves. I have the plan for you, right? That food plan was never meant for us. It wasn't. No person I work with is on the same food plan. So, like, any food book was not written for you. Like,
Mhm.
you really have to learn yourself what works for you and what doesn't. And that takes some experimentation. And, that's so different than the traditional substance use field, right? We're not like, oh, experiment with a little alcohol. Whereas, like, when it comes to volume, it really is important that you determine, oh, okay, it works for me to eat at 10. It works for me to eat at 9, because everyone has a different life. Everyone has a different schedule, and everyone has bio individual needs when it comes to their nutrition and food plan.
I love that. I love it.
I agree. You know, all of us would love to be free from the effects of processed food, but so many people, I think, are fearful of starting this process because it's going to hurt. That the concept is this is going to hurt. This
Mhm.
is going to be challenging. And what am I going to do when a craving comes up because you want to go into the fetal position? And so, do you have some practical advice of people that they're wanting to get started, but they can lean into it without overwhelm?
Yeah, absolutely. So first we need to normalize that, fear of cravings is completely expected. This is, cravings are going to happen in recovery and substance use disorder. And that is not a straightforward process. I also think it's really important to tap into the recovery research, which says for anybody with a severe substance use disorder, it may take up to 8 years and multiple interventions for them to get 1 year abstinence. And that's substances, that's not even food. So I think the reality is that this is going to take some time, and we need to be patient, and we should be allowed to practice recovery, right? It's not failure, it's growth when things don't necessarily go right. So I would say the first thing to do is to really start with, removing whatever ultra processed foods or the foods that trigger you out of your house, because our house needs to be a safe place. It is a place where we are going to be vulnerable or have vulnerable moments. And, we're also, if we're just starting this out, we might be experiencing some withdrawal symptoms. And so, access alone is enough to use. So
For
it
sure.
makes sense to seek like some kind of prevention. And so, I often will say to, our community that it's kind of like, when a fire goes out and the coals are still hot, any kind of piece of paper you put over them is going to light up. And that's like your first really 30 days of recovery. And so we all may have like family members who want to, keep some of these foods in the house. But, if this were alcohol and we were an alcoholic, they would be so understanding. And so we need to frame it in that way to them sometimes for the seriousness of what it is. And also know that this will not be your forever, that you will get to a place in your recovery where you'll be stable and they can have their foods. Now, I still, 6+ years in, don't want 2-bite brownies on the kitchen counter. I'm going to, keep it in the cupboard so I'm not cute and triggered, but they can be in the house and I don't think about them.
Thank you. I'm glad that you're talking about the progression of recovery and the importance of where some people are in their recovery journey. If they've got a few years under their belt, they might be in a different place than the folks that are coming in brand new.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And again, to be patient when you start, because we get new taste buds every 14 days. So when you first start, real food's not going to taste, exciting. However, like we talk about that progression over time, you're going to be like, wow, blueberries and wow, apple or whatever it is, the flavor profile just enhances, and it's really out of this world. So I really think, as we remove the ultra processed foods from our house, the other important thing is to fill it with whole foods that you love. We even tell our clients in the first stages, like, don't necessarily even limit yourself on what you allow yourself to eat during the withdrawal stage. If you have real food, allow yourself to eat the real food. That's honoring that homeostatic pathway, that physical hunger. And if we honor physical hunger, then those hedonic foods, those ultra processed food, those energy dense foods are less appealing or attractive. So, allowing yourself just to eat when it may be emotional, it may be a craving. Who cares? In the beginning, just eat whole foods and allow yourself, that time, rest, recovery. I think joining a support community, whether it's Real Food Recovery, Sweet Sobriety, Vera has her Facebook group where, you get the support, you can ask the questions, you can see what other people are doing. We recover together. And especially with food, it's so confusing, right? So again, I think getting that support is key. And then I would say the one other key piece that I think when we're starting this journey is practicing mindful eating. So we are so used to eating standing up, eating with our hands, eating in the car, eating, wherever. Like start to, and that's total nervous system dysregulation, right? So we're not in a state of rest and digest. So we just really want to sit down, eat our food on a plate, eat with cutlery, allow yourself that 20 minutes to consume your meal. And, what we know about mindful eating is it prevents overeating, it promotes really digestion. It reduces that emotional eating or stress eating. It enhances your body awareness, and it really increases satisfaction with your meals.
But let's be clear. I think mindful eating works best with whole, single ingredient, unprocessed.
Absolutely. Mindful eating is not intuitive eating. So mindful eating is all about like whole real foods and putting those on our plate. I also think it's really hard to mindfully eat ultra processed foods, right? Because it's created for us to want more.
And the chemical release in the brain and body is going.
Yeah, and they override our hunger and our fullness signals. So you can't really like mindful eating is a practice in recovery where we're eating our non-ultra processed foods. And again, it's, it maybe you've got a really busy life, start with one meal a day. It doesn't have to be all three, and you're never doing it wrong as long as you try. So we just don't want to also be looking at our screens, but that to be said, it doesn't mean you can't listen to a podcast. It doesn't mean you can't have music on. I always suggest pull your table over to a window. At least you can look outside. Nature's very regulating. So again, we have had such a relationship with food where it's been the enemy, and we need to start to create a relationship of like love and trust around our real food.
I'm so glad you brought that point up about taking time to sit down and eat because girls, I ate 2 of my meals in the car yesterday. It's just, a psycho busy day. And that does happen, but I'm so glad that you brought that point up. Just stop, get off the hamster wheel and just sit down and just focus on what you're doing. I need
and
that reminder.
When we're in sympathetic state, all our energy is everywhere else except our digestion. So we often feel bloated, we feel uncomfortable after eating like that. And, what I commonly find is clients who are in a sympathetic state all day and they just go to the food, they're using it to put them in that parasympathetic, that peace state.
That was my life.
Exactly. Numb out, escape, like exactly. So again, I think eventually it can be helpful to find ways to regulate yourself so you're not using food to do it. So whether it's breathing, mindfulness practice, just getting outside, starting some of that self-care, I think that can be really helpful in the early days of recovery. And we're not used to it. So we need to learn what works for you.
Oh gosh, I've got so many other questions. We'll have to have you back. But Jamie, do you want to?
Oh, no, go ahead. Ask another question.
Okay. People that have cravings, they just, that's so hard. It's so painful. It's so traumatic. They want to beat themselves up. They're so down. They want to quit. They say, I'll never get there. Do you have advice for people that have the binges? I meant to say binges. I know I said cravings, but people that have the binges, that it's so painful. It's so traumatic. It's so hard when we feel like we fall off the wagon because we thought we were doing good. And then we have this big sidestep. Do you want to just end up with your advice for people that have binges and what to do with that?
Yeah, again, I would just reinforce that this is a process and it takes time and there's no perfection. We really need to be able to practice. You know, there is a lot of emotional eating that happens within food addiction, and we experience some of the research says over 300 emotions in one day. You know, we
Wow.
like with, food addiction recovery, we need also that emotional sobriety, and that takes time. All of these tools, these coping skills that you're going to be given, you have to practice. And again, because we're biologically hardwired for food and it's everywhere, that this is going to take time, and that self-compassion is going to be so important. So when people have, slips or a binge, it's really important, although it's going to feel really hard in the moment because we are so used to shaming ourselves, like, oh, you're an idiot, why did you do this again? Oh, you're such a failure, you're never going to get this. When we talk to ourselves that way, that shuts us down, that closes us, and it actually keeps us in the food. Now, if I'm able to get curious and really like investigate, I wonder why that happened. I'd been doing really well, I ate my first meal. Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yes.
That person cut me off. My boss was talking like this to me. I was really stressed about this conversation I was going to have with my husband. Oh, of course. Okay, now I know that I'm going to look for solutions. And next time I'm feeling these exact same things, maybe I need to create a craving management plan or a safety plan around that. Or, if I'm not even aware, and that puts me at a high risk factor for like a seemingly unimportant decision. So if I'm aware that I'm activated, maybe I'm not going to stop and get gas because we know gas stations are like candy central, right? Maybe I'll get gas in the morning. Maybe after that long, hard day, it's not the best time to go grocery shopping. Maybe it's better I go home, wake up tomorrow, have my breakfast, and then do that. This just really helps us to have that self compassion. And I will say, self compassion is a new language. Like you might as well be teaching me French or Spanish when somebody first told me this. You may not have the language, and so it may be really important for you to listen to self-compassion meditations, to start to wire your brain in a certain way. I worked with youth friend. They were 16 to 21 for a long time in a shelter, and I started to think in swear words, and I was like, what is going on here? But I was just surrounded by that environment and the way they talked all the time. Well, you can use it in a positive way. So, listening to self compassion meditations before you go to bed or driving on your way to work. And then you start to notice that, oh, isn't that interesting? Like, I'm starting to be able to have the words to talk to myself in a compassionate way when I'm struggling, or maybe I have a return to use.
Beautiful. Perfect way to end. We
I love
really
it.
appreciate you being here, and hopefully we can have you back
I
sometime.
please,
Thank
I would
you.
love that. We need to continue this conversation, Clarissa.
Yeah,
Thank you.
for sure.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
And if you want to find out more about us, find us at realfoodrecovery4u.com. That's the number 4 and the letter U. Thanks, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.